Welcome to episode 89, Sunscreen 101. Definers, today we're going to be talking about a pretty relevant topic for the summer, sunscreen. We're going to be covering myths from SPF to reef safety, and of course talking about the impacts of sunscreen on marine life. So welcome, as always, to Sustainability Defined, where we define sustainability one topic and one bad joke at a time. I'm your host, Nethra.
And I'm Cecilia. And Nethra, what's up with you? How was your weekend? We're here on a lovely Monday evening sitting down with you definers.
Yeah, definers.
And I want to know more about your weekend.
Yeah, well, I've honestly been all over the place. I've been traveling a lot, currently on the market for a new job. So doing some interviews here and there. And
Same. Congrats.
Yeah, thanks. Congrats to you too, Cecilia. Yeah, I mean, I'm currently in North Carolina. I'm visiting here for a wedding. So Covey and Neelam, if you happen to be listening to this, happy wedding week. So to definers, if you don't know, like Cecilia and I actually record like 2 weeks in advance. So we plan a lot for these episodes.
We do. They are little, gifts to you all. And we hope you're learning something as much as we learn from these super insightful conversations with our industry experts. So
and Cecilia, wait, before we get into it, what are you up to this weekend?
What am I up to? What am I up to this weekend or the last weekend?
Oh, yeah, the last weekend.
Well, this last weekend, I saw the Materialist movie with Dakota Johnson, Pedro Pascal, and Chris Evans. And
oh my gosh.
I don't know. Like, I thought it was really good. I thought it was a good, cinematic experience. I love A24, but I've heard a lot of mixed reviews, and I'm curious to hear everyone's reviews. If you've seen it, let me know. I would love to hear your thoughts on this movie because I was super excited for it to come out. I was expecting a love triangle, but you just have to watch the movie and see.
Yeah, that's sort of what the trailer was giving. It's supposed to be like the rom-com of the year, but I'll have to give it a shot and watch. I just saw the trailer.
Yeah, no, I'm a rom-com girly through and through, and I don't know if that lived up to the OG rom-com hype, to be honest. Do you have a favorite rom-com, Nethra?
I do. It's got to be How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. I just feel like they don't make movies like
classic.
that anymore. They just don't.
They don't. I'm trying to think of what mine is. I feel like I have too many. I really love that one with Hugh Grant. Which one is he not in, though? But the one where he's the prime minister.
Oh, I don't think I know about this. No.
Oh, Love Actually. How could I forget?
Love Actually. Yes. I have seen that. I'm more of an early 2000s Amanda Bynes rom-com type of person.
She
What a
is
Girl
good.
Wants.
She's that man. Yes, exactly. I love that we said that at the same time. Great minds think alike.
Great minds do think alike. And these movies really remind me of summer. So it's kind of very relevant to this as well. I remember watching this in my basement.
Totally. So since it's summertime, we have a special topic for you guys. We're all applying sunscreen to stay safe out there, so I hope. So this topic is extremely relevant. For a quick episode rundown today before we get started, we're going to be talking about sunscreen and its environmental impacts to coral reefs and other aquatic ecosystems like rivers and lakes because folks, definers, sunscreen affects all the aquatic ecosystems that you put sunscreen on and then go into. So we're going to start also by providing a brief overview on coral reefs, their role in the ecosystem, and their impact in climate change. We're going to ask some critical questions like how does sunscreen fit into the scope of stressors for coral reefs and how sunscreen can be a way to improve this coral reef resilience in the face of climate change. So stay tuned.
Right. And we're also going to be talking about the health impacts of sunscreen and some of the do's and don'ts regarding that topic. So we do have a deep dive as usual with one of our industry experts, Katie Day. She is a senior manager of science and policy at the Surfrider Foundation. And Katie has developed a reef-safe sunscreen guide that she's going to dig into. So stay tuned to learn more about this. And you can actually check out their website and access this guide.
And disclaimer, this episode is not sponsored. We just really want to feature these organizations because we believe in their mission and we also align with their values. So without further ado, let's get into it.
All right, definers. So I think we often go about our days, routines, and lives truly not really using common sense. When we apply things to our bodies or spray things on furniture or wash our clothes in something, these things just don't disappear. They either absorb into what they're placed onto or transfer to the things that they're interacting with. And in almost all cases, at the end of life, they get deposited back into or onto our planet. So through the air, water, soil, etc., which then through the cycle of life and growing and eating food and breathing and being human gets deposited back into us.
Crazy. Cue articles on how microplastics are in all 99% of human beings. I want to know where that 1% is. Where you at? How did you do it? Let me know. They need to be the influencer.
Yeah, like a plastic dodging influencer.
Yes, I want to see that.
And I bring this up not to scare you, but rather to remind you definers that humans are a part of nature and a part of cycles. We're not immune to what happens to our ecosystems, but we're rather directly affected by it, whether we see it or not. So there is no away when we throw things away or wash things off of our bodies. We can only filter so much that we intake, so making better choices for the planet, waterways, airways, etc., are ultimately making better choices for ourselves and our health and what we're down the line and down the cycle going to intake. So this is the lens that I wish to gift you before you listen to this episode. So please put on these glasses.
What a wonderful gift, Nethra. Thank you so much. And this is a good and important segue into this stagger stat I found while researching this topic for the episode. Did you know?
I'm scared.
I know, me too, a little bit as I say this, but did you know that 14,000 tons of sunscreen enter the ocean each year?
You know, I wish I didn't, but now I do.
Well, now you do, so do with that what you will, but 14,000 tons is equivalent to squeezing about 50 million bottles of sunscreen into the waterways, just straight dumping it. So
see, there's no way.
No way. And it goes back to saying what you were exactly saying about that concept of away, Nethra. This is the away. The ocean is the away. And it's sad to think about it that way, but we need to do something about it. And, these deposits of chemicals into the water have effects on marine life and human health. And with the rise of sunscreen use, we are seeing more companies become aware of this. And we're starting to see the label Reef-safe or reef-friendly circulating through sunscreen companies.
And it's an important movement that's shaping up. There are some companies that are using unsafe ingredients and mislabeling their products as reef-safe since this label is actually not regulated.
Uh-oh.
So, I know. So our expert, Katie Day, who we will be speaking to, will actually help you easily decipher what to look for in a sunscreen. So you'll see this in the interview, you hear about it.
Love that.
If these products aren't safe for reefs and other living organisms, they might not be the safest for us either. So I want to be clear that when we talk about the health impacts of sunscreen, Cecilia and I are not saying sunscreen is bad. We both use it.
No. I use it every day.
Yeah, we both use it daily. We encourage you to be conscious, though, as consumers and look for effective and safe ingredients. So our bodies absorb 60% of what we put on our skin surface.
Right. And full disclosure, Mom, if you're listening to this, I did put sunscreen on this morning, even though it's raining. Okay.
Wow. You're better than me. I barely yeah, it's bad, but go ahead.
Yes. Anyway, we are pro health and planet friendly. So use sunscreens that are healthy for your skin and coral reefs. And we'll talk more about that as the episode goes on. But we got porous skin out here, and I'm imagining all those chemicals that are in sunscreen just seeping into your skin. Imagine what that's doing to coral reefs. And ladies, I know we protect our skin barrier. Men too, I hope. So just something to think about. And Rhode, if you're listening, please sponsor us. I love that barrier butter.
They are a very barrier heavy promoting brand, but sunscreen isn't new, by the way. Ancient Egyptians used paste made from rice bran, jasmine, and lupine, and ancient Greeks used olive oil. The women in my family in India often use more physical barriers like cotton shawls or lightweight long sleeve materials, but the ability to want to protect your skin, age gracefully, and all of that is not new. So some of these chemical formulations, however, today are new, and the rates at which we are using them and subsequently washing them down the drain and into our waterways are having real effects.
So let's start with the most talked about effect The coral reefs. Quick overview. Coral reefs are vast underwater structures composed of the skeletons from colonial marine invertebrates. Now, if you're not a marine science enthusiast, you're probably yelling at me through your phone, like, what does that mean? Well, let me tell you in the simplest of terms. Coral reefs are big underwater homes made of teeny tiny sea animals. And these animals, called coral, live close together and build hard skeletons around themselves, kind of like building blocks of the coral reef. So over time, over time, these skeletons pile up and create huge, beautiful structures in the ocean where lots of sea creatures live and where I used to believe mermaids live, but that's a whole nother conspiracy / conversation.
Watch way too much H2O on Nickelodeon.
Oh, my love, H2O. But anyway, coral reefs are found all over the world and they're essential for keeping ocean ecosystems balanced. These amazing underwater structures are home to thousands of different organisms like tiny microorganisms, anemones, crustaceans, fish, and of course, the corals themselves. According to the EPA, about 25% of all marine species depend on coral reefs for survival. I mean, that's a huge number. Yeah. And these reefs provide home for over 1 million species, but they don't just support ocean life, they also benefit people too. Coral reefs provide food for coastal communities, they attract tourism, they protect shorelines from storms, and they can even serve as sources for new medicines. On a more technical level, reefs help with nutrient cycling, carbon and nitrogen fixing, and water filtration, all of which help keep the surrounding ocean healthy. So when we protect coral reefs, we're not just saving fish or pretty underwater scenes, we're supporting biodiversity, the global food chain, and even parts of our economy. These ecosystems are small but mighty, and their health affects far more than just the ocean.
Exactly. And these unseen ecosystems are at pretty big risk. None of this is new or shocking. We've all seen the coral bleaching images and the headlines, but
they need to make a horror movie out of those images because I'm scarred
honestly,
for life.
Yes. They look like skeletons. Like and for those of you who don't know, when coral bleaches, you're used to seeing that vibrant pink, purple, blues. When they bleach and when they lose color, it's signifying death. So the science, I know, death. The science is conclusive and very overwhelming. All signs and symptoms point directly to climate change. So for a brief summary, when more CO2 gases are pumped into the atmosphere, the temperature rises due to that greenhouse gas effect, which traps the heat in the atmosphere, and ocean acidification occurs. Ocean acidification is when carbon dioxide is absorbed into the ocean from the atmosphere, and it reduces calcification rates that help with reef building and reef-associated organisms by basically altering the seawater and decreasing its pH.
Crazy.
Right? So as CO2 is rising, so is the temperature. Hotter temperatures equal higher acidity of the ocean water, and higher acidity and higher temperatures change those pH levels. And sort of like your body, if your body's average temperature is 98 degrees and you shoot up that average to like 100, you're looking at a pretty high fever. You're looking at sweats. You're looking at sickness. You're looking at sitting on the couch and watching 3 seasons of Netflix.
Uh-oh.
But think about that the same way you think about average ocean temperatures. Like you change it by a degree, like systems change, systems shut down. You're looking at sick reefs. So, that's some perspective for you. And for thousands of years, these reefs have adapted to conditions, but in short, they're having a really hard time keeping up with the really drastic, quick changes to their environment. So they're bleaching, they're dying, and there's obviously a host of things that are contributing to this, and sunscreen is one of them.
And you point out a really important issue there, Nethra. These coral reefs have adapted to changes over time, but the thing that's making this kind of scary and appalling and attention grabbing is that quick, drastic change. That's what we have to keep in mind here. And these coral reefs and the coral reef organisms are very sensitive to changes, especially the pH. For example, the exoskeleton of the coral reef thins with the acidification of the ocean. So the right pH level needs to be maintained to make sure that the quality of the water is sufficient for coral reefs to survive and thrive. Over time, coral reefs have become increasingly damaged and polluted from things like agricultural runoff, development, and product buildup, which have caused the water to become cloudier. And because of this cloudiness, because of this pollution, beaches have become less hospitable and aquatic animals have become endangered, which I'm assuming most of us are aware of, those poor little creatures in the ocean.
Right. And so you might be thinking, what's sunscreen's role in terms of adding stressors to coral reefs? Well, Cecilia, tell us.
Great question. In August 2022, the National Academy of Sciences released a study which reviews the state of the science and the use of sunscreen ingredients and their environmental impacts. Overall, the study found that specific chemical UV filters found in chemical sunscreen can harm aquatic life, including these corals. Also, in recent years, coral scientists began to notice heightened levels of sunscreen molecules in popular swimming and diving areas, which are often near a lot of coral reefs. Cue the 14,000 tons of sunscreen that we mentioned earlier. This is how it happens, definers.
Yes. It leaches off of us into the waters and kind of like latches onto reefs. But quick pause, definers. You heard Cecilia say chemical sunscreen. All sunscreens are made from chemicals, obviously, but chemical sunscreen is referring to a specific type of sunscreen. So you're going to hear this in the interview as well, but there are two types of sunscreen on the shelves: physical and chemical sunscreens. Physical sunscreens are also known as mineral sunscreens, and they are the type that stay on the surface of your skin and create a barrier to reflect and scatter UV rays. So imagine it like
barrier butter.
You just love barrier butter, Cecilia.
I just want Rode to sponsor us.
Gotta look into their sustainability report first, but yeah.
Oh, of course, 100%.
But yeah, so those physical sunscreens are sort of like, they're literally reflecting like UV rays, right? And chemical sunscreens were designed to be absorbed into your skin and also absorb the UV rays. So they convert the UV rays into heat and then release them. So
kind of sus.
I know. Chemical sunscreens have gained popularity because they don't leave that typical white cast, like, Larry the lobster from SpongeBob with his white nose, but they don't leave that typical white cast, but they are notorious for having key offensive players that disrupt the marine ecosystems and our own endocrine systems and hormones. So Katie, our expert, she's going to be talking about those specific ingredients to avoid for your reefs, but also for your skin.
Great distinction that you point out there, Nethra, on those two types of sunscreen. Mineral sunscreen have definitely been getting a lot of attention for being the safer option, and there's been a lot of formula updates to help deal with the stereotypical white cast. We've seen a lot of product innovation on that side. And in the 1950s, molecules like titanium dioxide and zinc oxide were used as alternatives to petroleum-based chemical sunscreen products. That's right, definers. In the 1950s, before that, people were using petroleum-based chemical sunscreen products.
Ooh.
I know. But a drawback to these molecule-based products is their chalky white color that you mentioned earlier. That is undesirable because it's not a cute look at the beach. You don't want to take cute pictures with the white cast.
Right. Like consumers don't want to be looking like Casper on a beach day, but
no.
Scientists in the 1980s began testing lab-based molecules that can absorb rays like oxybenzone and oxytonate, which are those notoriously bad boy ingredients. And this was to, again, combat that white cast of the more naturally occurring ingredients that we mentioned in the physical sunscreens, like zinc oxide and titanium dioxide. So the research shows that octinoxate degrades into a chemical called benzophenone, which is a known cancer-causing agent and a hormone disruptor. So a lot of these things were produced like 30 years ago, so it's hard to understand the long-term effects. Studies are starting to come out now that are showing these effects. So a 2016 study showed that oxybenzone can cause deformities in both coral larvae and baby corals.
No, not the babies.
Not the babies, right? Like,
doesn't sit right.
It doesn't. They literally damage coral DNA and cause abnormal skeleton growth. So they're like actually actively deforming coral and making that growth really, really difficult. The FDA also released some pretty shocking studies on the absorption rates in humans of oxybenzone, homosalate, and octocrylene, which are these very common ingredients in your everyday chemical sunscreens. They have been found in breast milk. This indicates that the risks of these chemicals entering the bloodstream extend just beyond the sunscreen wearer. They're literally going to newborns.
Scary.
It is. And I mean, definers, like, think about pregnant women. They're advised to avoid certain things like retinols and other things because these products do seep into the bloodstream. So what's to say that these other products don't, right? So this is where that, I'm not trying to be shady, but this is where that common sense comes in, right? So after a single application of sunscreen, blood concentrations of oxybenzone were more than 180 times the FDA's level of concern.
Insane.
So not just like the recommended amount, they were 180 times the level of concern. And the oxybenzone level soared to more than 500 times the FDA's threshold after 4 days of use, which is like what most sunscreen labels recommend. We all use it every day. It's concerning.
That is concerning, Nethra. And sunscreen products can cause hidden infections that induce the lytic cycle of these symbiotic relationships with, I hope I pronounced this right, zooxanthellae. What do you think, Nethra?
Zooxanthellae. That's how I read it, but
Okay, well, zooxanthellae. The coral it's essentially an algae, definers, but the coral and the zooxanthellae algae have a mutualistic relationship, aka a little friendly partnership where the coral provides the zooxanthellae with protected environment and the coral polyp cells produce the carbon dioxide and water that the algae need for photosynthesis. So this algae uses energy from the sun to turn that carbon dioxide and water into oxygen and then helps the coral to remove waste. And they also provide a lot of the basic building blocks for coral reefs to grow. So sunscreen ingredients can trigger these lytic cycles of this relationship. And what this means is that a virus will replicate in the algae, eventually causing the algae cell to burst and release all those viral particles. And the damage caused by this viral infection causes the expulsion of the zooxanthellae algae, which then results in the coral losing some necessary functions that this symbiotic relationship provides for basic coral reef growth.
Lots of sciencey words to basically say that certain ingredients in sunscreen disrupt very important ecosystem relationships that the coral needs to thrive. And this is what basically makes the coral lose its vibrant color and lead to those incredibly depressing pictures that we all have seen of coral bleaching. And what is difficult about this whole cycle is that coral reefs reside in areas with high ecotourism, and a lot of people want to snorkel and enjoy these incredible ecosystems, but tourists wear sunscreen, and we just learned about the impacts that certain sunscreen ingredients have on coral reefs. And I say certain sunscreen ingredients to emphasize that not all sunscreens are toxic to reefs. And we're going to get into those solutions. So it's not all doom and gloom here, definers, but these high levels of recreation are obviously having an impact on ecosystems, and we as a consumer need to help coral reefs remain resilient in the face of climate change. And I feel like switching sunscreens and being aware of ingredients is rather low-hanging fruit. So,
Nethra, is this not when you say vote with your dollar? I feel like I'm expecting you to say that now.
vote with your dollar. I need like a jingle for this or something, but like literally vote with your dollar.
Do it.
You've heard it. You've heard me say it a million times, definers. Pick and invest in those good quality reef-safe sunscreens for your health and for the planet. And that's my elevator pitch.
I love it. I'm here for it. But definers, what can we do to help the coral and the biodiversity and the services they support? What can we do as the consumer? What can we do to vote with our dollar? Well, for starters, promoting awareness and education are great ways to start. So thank you for listening to this episode and share it with everyone in your network.
Woo.
Also, researching true reef-safe sunscreens and reading ingredient labels are a great way to mitigate impact, support organizations, and support science are also a great way to help these coral reefs.
Right. Yes to all of that. We aren't saying sunscreen is bad. It is super important, just as important as getting the right and safe option. And we're also not saying that sunscreen is solely responsible for the degradation of all marine ecosystems. As we all know, there are many factors that contribute to ecosystems collapsing and changing. So this is one, like I said, that seems like low-hanging fruit that we all can have a direct hand in influencing. So now let's hear more about what we can do and some of the myths around sunscreen from expert Katie Day from the Surfrider Foundation.
And Katie Day is at the forefront of this awareness campaign. Not only is she a super cool scientist, but she also developed a reef-friendly sunscreen guide that summarizes how conventional sunscreens harm our oceans and human health. And she also outlined some tips on how to stay sun safe and ocean safe. We'll link this guide in our newsletter and social media, so be sure to sign up for our newsletter on our website and follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn. Now, let's hear some insights from the experts. Definers, we have reached the interview portion of our episode. Today, we're here with Katie Day from the Surfrider Foundation. She wrote a very detailed manifesto about the ins and outs of sunscreen and their effects on coral reefs. She also talks about the health impacts, the environmental impacts, and how to really tell if your sunscreen is indeed reef safe.
Welcome to Sustainability Defined, Katie. Can you tell the definers a bit about yourself and how you got into this work and writing the sunscreen guide and being the SPF guru?
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for having me. So I am the Senior Manager of Science and Policy at the Surfrider Foundation, which is a nonprofit dedicated to the protection and enjoyment of our ocean waves and beaches for all people. And I come from the realm of environmental sciences, which is kind of looking at the holistic approach to researching our natural world and looking at how ecosystems and natural resources and human actions all interact and impact one another. So when it comes to the sunscreen guide and coral reef ecosystems, those are very near and dear to my heart. I grew up around coral reefs. Definitely acknowledge like my privilege of getting to grow up in the Caribbean and having proximity to these, incredible ecosystems. Reef breaks are also my favorite type of surfing wave. I've been surfing since I was like 10. And then even during high school and college, I was a first mate and snorkel guide, taking visitors around the US and British Virgin Islands and taking them snorkeling for the first time and get to see and experience coral reefs. So I was very disheartened to learn that sunscreen that I had been globbing on my body for decades, my entire life essentially, was causing some harm to the reef. So it's definitely, appreciate the opportunity to get the word out there about responsible recreation and the little things that we can do as individuals to protect these incredible ecosystems.
That's awesome.
Katie, thanks so much for that wonderful introduction. It sounds like you're super passionate, and you mentioned putting on sunscreen and you recently found out that it was harming the oceans. So I'm curious to know, what are the most common misconceptions people have about sunscreen and its safety, both for humans and for the environment?
I think kind of two things. I think a lot of people think that all sunscreens work the same way, and that when it comes to SPF, the higher the SPF, the better that sunscreen is for your health. So I'll kind of share more on that. When it comes to the first thing about how sunscreens work, there are two main types of sunscreens. There's chemical sunscreens and physical sunscreens. So chemical sunscreens work by literally being designed to be absorbed by your skin. And then once it's absorbed, it basically kind of absorbs and scatters that UV radiation, those UV rays, and dissipates it into heat. So it protects your skin from UV by basically transforming that into heat and releasing it from your skin. Alternatively, physical blockers, which are your minerals, so zinc oxide and titanium dioxide, they act as a straight up physical blocker. They don't get absorbed by our skin, they just go right on top. The other thing is that SPF, which stands for sun protection factor, It's basically a measure of the amount of UVB rays that a sunscreen is able to block. Both physical and chemical sunscreens will have an SPF rating. So SPF 30, which is the one you see probably most often, and that's what's generally the minimum recommendation for sun protection from, like skin cancer foundations. That blocks 97% of UVB. SPF 50, which sounds like way more than SPF 30, only blocks one additional percentage point. It blocks 98% of rays. And then you can see SPF 100. I've seen SPF 120, and those all block 99% of rays. So yes, they do provide an incremental increase in the amount of UVB rays that you're being exposed to, but not as much as you may think. And the problem is that for those products to go from an SPF 30 to like an SPF 80 or 100, it requires far more of those active chemical ingredients to be added to the product and at higher concentration. So if you look at the ingredients label of like an SPF 80 or an SPF 100 sunscreen, there will often be like 6 chemicals listed. Alternatively, like SPF 30, even SPF 50, you can literally just have zinc oxide as the only active ingredient that's still able to reach those levels of protection. So you're just exposing yourself to more chemicals and higher doses of those chemicals when you're reaching those really high SPF values.
Yeah, that honestly is a bit concerning that there's so much of a lack of education around that, because I'm finding that out for the first time in our conversation. And I'm
Scary.
like, wow, I would always opt for like SPF 70, but it's like, wow, like 60% of what we put on our skin gets absorbed into our body. So probably even more, honestly. But speaking of absorption, I mean, like you said, this is being absorbed by reefs, affecting marine aquatic ecosystems, probably affects like microorganisms as well. So we were in our research learning about the reef-safe term. And in your guide, you even mentioned this, that reef-safe is not a regulated term. Are there plans to get this term regulated? And actually, before we even dive into that, how would you define reef-safe?
I like the term reef friendly more than reef safe, but I would define something that's more reef friendly as a sunscreen or a product that doesn't contain any chemicals that are documented to be harmful to the reef environment. When it comes to a reef friendly sunscreen, that means that it doesn't contain any active chemical ingredients. So to me, a reef friendly sunscreen is one that only has zinc oxide or titanium dioxide. In other words, only has minerals as active ingredients, and it is a lotion that rubs on your skin as opposed to a spray that can kind of get all over the place.
Okay, thank you for that. So, with that being said, are there plans to get that term reef safe regulated and maybe even more of an official label? And how can consumers avoid that greenwashing from brands that are mislabeling? Because I feel like I've seen chemical sunscreens with like avobenzone and they're labeling themselves as reef safe. And to me, that's greenwashing.
It's definitely concerning and unfortunate that terms reef safe and reef friendly are not regulated. I would love to see some regulation and standardization of those terms because, as you noted, it's very misleading for consumers. We have requested some congressional action to kind of introduce legislation to encourage that, but I have not seen any, actual active efforts underway. But I would certainly be supportive of that. I do know that there have been several lawsuits against products that have claimed to be reef safe when they contain chemicals that have been found to be harmful to the reef ecosystem.
So you mentioned that zinc and titanium are some of those mineral aspects that consumers should look for when choosing their sunscreen to protect both their skin and the environment. But I'm wondering, with the ingredients consumers need to look for that are considered not safe for skin or aquatic ecosystems?
Like I kind of shared before, like the easiest thing to do is to just, opt for sunscreen lotions that use minerals instead of chemicals. And you can always look for that under the ingredients label of your sunscreen. The beautiful thing is that all sunscreens in the US are required to show their ingredients right on the packaging.
Beautiful.
Makes it so much easier for us as consumers to like be able to do our own due diligence and educate ourselves and really pick the products that we believe in and that we want to support. But there's a whole host of chemicals. Oxybenzone and octinoxate are often the most common. Those were the first two to be banned by a regulation. The state of Hawaii passed the oxybenzone bill, which was very exciting. Surfrider was heavily involved in with a ton of amazing other local organizations in Hawaii. But that list has expanded as more and more research has been done. So that includes octocrylene, avobenzone, homosalate, kind of basically every chemical sunscreen ingredient that is currently considered on the over-the-counter approval list from the FDA has been found to be a concern for coral reefs. The other thing to flag when it comes to human health impacts, which you guys probably already talked about earlier, was that the FDA recently did a reassessment of all of the sunscreen ingredients that are on its generally recognized as safe and effective list for over-the-counter sunscreens. And what they found was that every single chemical that they have been approving since the 90s actually has insufficient data on its safety for human health. This is where it becomes a concern that for 30, 40 years, we've been seeing all of these chemicals in our sunscreens, which, like I flagged, as the interest in getting higher SPFs has gone on, we're seeing more of those chemicals at higher doses are actually really under-researched in regards to human health impacts. What they've found is that it's getting absorbed by our bodies into deeper levels of our skin and even into our blood. And they found it in urine, they found it in breast milk. So they don't really know the lasting impacts or how easily these chemicals are getting, disposed of out of our bodies once they get absorbed. That's become an increasing concern for little ones, right? Because you're advised to put sunscreen on your kids because we want to protect them from the sun. And that is important. UV radiation is harmful and is a concern. We do need to protect ourselves from the sun. So I'm never advocating for people not to wear sunscreen, but I just want them to realize that there are different types of sunscreens out there and there are much better options that are just considered safer for human use as well as for, aquatic and marine wildlife.
Yeah, as Nethra likes to say, vote with your dollar, right, Nethra?
Yes, vote with your dollar. Pay for the products that are going to protect our ecosystems and our endocrine systems. But I think you made a few good points here. So just to summarize for the definers, honestly, when searching for sunscreen, it might be easier to narrow in on the right ingredients versus the ones that you should avoid, because I think the list is quite long. And as we've even seen with BPA and plastics, certain chemicals can go under different names and it's not always regulated. So it's probably best to, rather than avoiding all the avobenzones and avo whatevers,
All the big, large names.
all the big large names, just focus in on those two ingredients, zinc oxide and titanium dioxide. And also, you make a good point, which you mentioned earlier, which we also talked about in the explainer, is these chemical sunscreens were designed to be absorbed by your skin. So they probably are being absorbed by your skin and into deeper levels of our body. Very good point. And are mineral sunscreens always better for the planet than chemical ones? Can mineral sunscreen ingredients accumulate or bioaccumulate in marine ecosystems as well?
Based on our current knowledge of, especially titanium dioxide and zinc oxide, for use in lotions at the non-nano size, they are, considered completely safe for human health, and they have found to be much less harmful to marine wildlife. That type of sunscreen really stays on our skin longer, so it's less likely to rub off and become bioavailable while you're recreating. They've also found that non-nano is unable to permeate through the deeper layers of your skin. So it just stays on the top, right? It's not getting absorbed into our bodies. It is good to flag, though, that all products have an impact, right? Anything that we create will have some impact on the natural world. We just really want to pick those products that have the least bad or ideally a positive benefit on the environment. The good thing is, zinc and titanium dioxide are natural minerals. They exist naturally in the environment. So to answer your question, like simply, I'd say yes. Based on our current knowledge, they're pretty much always better when they're in that non-nano size. When they become really, really tiny, they call it nanoparticles. That's where there's the potential concern that they may be able to get into the deeper layers of your skin and maybe be a little bit more toxic to marine life. So that's why we always say, opt for non-nano mineral-based sunscreens. I will also add the importance of opting for lotion over spray. And this is definitely the case when it comes to, obviously the chemicals, but titanium dioxide. Titanium dioxide is fine for topical application, but when it's aerosolized, has been considered as a carcinogen if inhaled. So I do not recommend, aerosolized titanium dioxide sunscreens. Definitely opt for those lotions.
Good distinction. Honestly, for me, I feel like when I have an aerosol sunscreen, I never feel like it's getting anywhere but the air. Like it doesn't feel like it's even getting on my body. So I always end up spraying it into my hand and just rubbing it on like a lotion. So let's avoid that altogether, definers.
The wind blows it away and then it stains all sorts of things. So yeah.
And they're stinky.
Right. And I know you sort of mentioned a few of the markers of a planet forward sunscreen, that mineral composition with those two ingredients that you highlighted, as well as non-aerosol. We want something non-nano, non-aerosol, lotion form. Any other features that you would add for a planet forward sunscreen if you had to design one?
Yeah, I think the packaging too, right? We want to, ideally, if there's an option for like a zero waste reusable tin or kind of a paper-based product so that it's not just going into like, a plastic container that's going to go in the landfill forever or worst case, make its way into the marine environment. So yeah, just like anything that we purchase, kind of thinking about the packaging that it's in is also a good consideration. And then I always, love when companies make sunscreens of different shades so that it can blend into all skin types. That stays on really well when surfing or swimming. And the beautiful thing is, zinc oxide sunscreens have been around forever, but as the popularity of mineral-based sunscreens has really gained traction with this awareness of concerns about chemical-based sunscreens, they're becoming so much more affordable. And that's really important that they're not just like the niche, fancy, mineral sunscreens. We want them to be on shelves of, all of your local stores and major, chain stores, because we want them to be readily available and affordable to the general public. And it's great that we are seeing that becoming the case.
Some very good points. I mean, I feel like I can never get away from plastic in my everyday life. It seems to infiltrate literally every single aspect of everyday life. It's impossible. I would love to see a reusable tin or paper-based sunscreen product out there. So for our last question, this is more of a fun little silly question we ask all of our guests at the end of each interview, and it's a party fact question. So if you had one fact about this subject that you said at a party and it would shock people, what would it be?
Well, I think a lot of folks that work in the environmental realm and the environmental policy realm might kind of resonate with me on this one, but I'm really trying to be less of a downer at parties because just of the nature of our work where we're like documenting the demise of these ecosystems, right? Like,
No, it can get depressing.
yes, like we're experiencing another global coral reef bleaching event, and everyone's like, whoa, okay, who brought her?
Me at
So
every party.
Who brought her?
like the positive or like fun fact side of things is that, coral reefs cover only 1% of the ocean, but they support 25% of all marine life.
Working hard.
Totally. Yes. They're like this blip in our ocean environment that are like such a huge, critically important part of that ecosystem. Yeah, it's just so important for these reefs to have a fighting chance as, our planet has some major changes ahead. So look, I'm already
Right.
downer again. So I don't know if that's like a fun fact for you, but
It's definitely a shock factor. Yeah.
Definitely knocks my socks off. We need to rebrand coral reefs as like the new top 1%. Like they are like the most
Oh my
important
God.
1%.
I love it.
Yeah, forget the billionaires.
Forget them.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Katie, for being here. I feel like this is really insightful, especially with the insane rise in like the use of sunscreen that we've seen, which again, not trying to bash on. It's actually great that people are really caring about sun protection. I know there's obviously beauty factors like anti-aging and other things that are contributing to the rise of like the availability of sunscreen, the variety of product. But hopefully this podcast reaches you sunscreen fiends out there and it really convinces you to consider those mineral products. And if you're a sunscreen manufacturer, please put the reefs first.
Please.
I do have one other thing I want to flag, the importance of broad spectrum sunscreens. So, like I said before, SPF, that sun protection factor rating, is just in regards to the amount of UVB rays, but there are also UVA rays. And the easy way to think of it is UVB causes that burn, the redness. UVA causes that premature aging. That's the wrinkles and kind of the longer term. Both of them can be carcinogenic. So when you're getting a sunscreen, you want to make sure that it is broad spectrum, that it protects against both UVA and UVB. The good news is both minerals, zinc and titanium dioxide, provide broad spectrum protection. So that is like another just added benefit of these two just being great go-tos. But just for all the listeners out there to make sure that they stay safe while they're recreating, you want to, in the sun, you want to block against both of those UVs. And I always like to highlight the importance of using sun management, not just relying on sunscreen. It's important to also, cover up, put on a cute hat, put on some, sun protective clothing. Sometimes if you can, stay out of the sun during those peak hours of 10 to 2, just so that it's, just a little bit less product you have to glob all over yourself and ultimately put out into the environment.
Yes, I totally second that. Like I went snorkeling in Puerto Rico and just bought a full sleeve. I actually thrifted a full sleeve swim shirt instead of just reapplying sunscreen because I'm like, I just feel like this is the sunscreen.
It's so much easier.
Yeah, it's just going to keep washing off. It's so much easier. So yeah, there are totally other ways to just avoid these tactics completely and still protect yourself from the sun. So great call out. And we appreciate you being here.
Yeah, well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. I just from like the environmental science realm, I think it's so good for all of us to remember that as humans, we are part of these ecosystems, right? Like we are part of the natural world. Our actions have a major impact on the environment. But the good news is it's entirely up to us on whether that impact is positive or negative. So just acting a little bit more thoughtfully, choosing your products wisely, can really make a difference. Yeah, let's all just make these decisions that leave things a little bit better and can still protect ourselves as well as, this beautiful world around us that we're a part of.
Beautifully said, Katie. Thanks for those extra party fun facts at the end. I loved them. I feel like I learned so much in this conversation, and I hope the definers did as well. So thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Surprise definers, if you have made it this far in the episode, we have 2 surprises for you. An exclusive lightning interview with Stream to Sea, a reef-safe sunscreen brand that is focused on making oceans healthy and keeping humans healthy, and a giveaway from this brand. So you can head to our Instagram to check out the instructions to see how to enter. So today I am joined by Mike Malterre, the Executive Vice President of Stream to Sea. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks for having me.
So Stream to Sea is a woman-owned, veteran-operated company that manufactures all their products in their FDA-registered facility in rural Central Florida. So you guys are really supporting U.S. jobs, which is awesome. Can you tell us a little bit more about your organization and how you all got started?
Well, Autumn Blum is our cosmetic chemist and an herbalist. Absolute badass woman. She is a Women's Divers Hall of Fame person. And when she sold her last company, she was diving in Palau, as one does when they sell their company, and was on her safety stop coming up and watched people jumping off of a boat and the rainbow slick that came off of their bodies. And she really wondered, oh no, I mean, it looks beautiful, but what is this doing?
Oh no.
So that was the basis of our company, because the first thing she noticed was people were showering right off the back of the boat. And all of that was going into the water. And let's just, not even from a science perspective, let's just talk about it from a logical perspective. Most soaps and shampoos and detergents are designed to cut grease. But what does everything in the water feel like? It has a slime layer, right? That's what keeps it safe and fast and all sorts of things. If you cut that, they don't survive for very long. So that was the beginning of our company, was let's see if we could make a shampoo that didn't cause these problems. And luckily, it worked. We finally got there. The first round failed miserably, like most of them, right? So we figured out that we had to make things like a mask defog, because many of the baby shampoos that we've seen do exactly that. Put 2 drops into a 20-gallon aquarium and everything starts to die. And it doesn't take very long.
And that's a baby shampoo? That's supposed to be?
That was a baby shampoo.
That's scary.
Right? It is. It's very scary. And we're putting them on babies. And I don't care whether they're human babies or, coral or fish babies. I think they all have the right to life. So, this is the trajectory that we're fighting against.
Right. And in our conversation before we recorded, you were talking about how Stream to Sea, the mission is focusing on not only like ocean fertility and ocean life, but also like human health and human fertility and how those 2 things are tied. Can you tell the definers a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I live on the big island of Hawaii, and there's a little bay called Honaunau where there's a famous snorkeling and diving spot called 2 Steps. They actually have porta potties now with all these signs that say, please do not pee in the ocean. Please use the restroom here. And it's because they believe that the estrogen levels that they're finding in all of these bays are coming from humans peeing it out. Well, now, I had a discussion with a local scientist who went, oh yeah, it's all pharmaceuticals. And I'm like, okay, well, pharmaceutical companies typically own body care companies, and it doesn't surprise me that about 80% of, according to Sorbonne University out of France, about 80% of every body care product on the planet contains endocrine disruptors and or estrogen mimickers. So to me, I don't believe that people have that much urine coming out of them, nor are they using that much birth control that it would cause a bay to have high enough levels of estrogen that the fish that start off female and one needs to convert to male during breeding time, they can't, because there's too much estrogen in the water. So I believe it's actually coming from sewage and from all the people, because they're all water soluble. It goes right through into the ocean and whatever's on people's bodies. So I don't care if it's shampoo, soap, hand sanitizer, lotions, makeups. They all, at least 80% or more, contain these endocrine disruptors and estrogen.
Right. And these are things that are not only washing off into our waterways and affecting fish, like these are things that can be reabsorbed into our systems, because there's only so much filtration that can happen when you have this amount of product and these amount of chemicals floating into our aquatic systems, if I'm correct. Is there a solution?
There are a number of solutions, and the one that I can guarantee at this point is Stream to Sea. And that is because we have done all the testing to make sure that this doesn't happen. So within 30 minutes of application to a human's skin, they can test your urine and find your endocrine disruptors and estrogen levels through the roof. Now, unfortunately, some of the chemicals in Hawaii that they banned, the chemical companies came up with new ones, and many times those convert into either estrogen, endocrine disruptors, or carcinogens. So we're really trying to change this trajectory of the ocean and humanity losing their fertility at close to the same rate. And it's fairly significant.
I see that you guys have a product called Coral Care. So this is marketed as the world's first sunscreen that nourishes coral. So I'm pretty curious about this because I'm interested to understand how a product that is typically known to be disruptive to ecosystems can actually have the reverse effect. So can you tell our listeners what this is and how this is even possible?
And isn't that beautiful? What we did, we were looking at most things that we find are very detrimental to the environment and potentially to humans. We wanted to hit a neutral, right? We wanted to make sure that we did no harm. And so all of our testing is designed specifically to make sure that we don't do any harm. Then somebody approached us and said, hey, is it possible to take it to a positive? And I said, well, if we're the only ones that can prove that we're not killing coral larvae, then we're probably the only ones that could tell you whether we could make it a positive. So what we did is we went into research and we put in trace minerals and food nourishment that coral would want. And then we went about 18 weeks working with Professor Michael Sweet at Derby University. It's spelled with an E. So those folks over in the UK like to have Derby sound like Darby, but if you're looking it up, you spell it Derby. And he works with the UN on coral research. He spent 18 weeks putting our products, other people's products, into tanks with coral and wanted to see what it would do. Unfortunately, or fortunately for us, he didn't know that we made it originally. So he wanted to test it against one of the safest products out there. So he tested Stream to Sea against Coral Care, and they were both made by us, which I think is terrific because it just
That's so funny.
It just confirmed that our normal formulas are a neutral, right? Didn't do much of anything to the coral. It was still growing and healthy. And then the new one, it actually grew 21%, up to 21% more when exposed to these trace minerals and nourishment, right? A proprietary blend that if you think about it, why are we all taking supplements right now? Because the earth is lacking in these trace minerals, right? So this is essentially like a supplement for coral, which to me, why not? I had somebody at a scuba show recently, you could tell, like red in the face, ready to fight, and said to me, I don't buy it. What do you think this is going to do on a day-to-day basis? And I said, well, we're sitting in Long Beach, California. So if you go out into the ocean and go surfing, what will it do? It'll keep you from getting sunburned. Do I think it's going to save the ocean? No, not one at a time. But when I look at places like Hanama Bay, where the levels are so high of these chemicals that the coral has been dead for a long time, right? And the fish are not reproducing. If you put 4,000 people a day into this very enclosed bay that were wearing Coral Care, would that have an impact? Yeah, I think it would. And his response was, wow, I did not expect you to say that. I expected you to defend that this was going to fix all the problems in the world. I said, well, that's because you think we're a marketing company and we're a science company. We are people and planet over profit, right? We are science over marketing. And so I wish we were better at marketing. So thank you for having us on because we really struggle to get the word out there. And that's just not where we spend our time and our money. But it's really something that we have to get better at because the planet's kind of counting on it. If we keep going down the current path and there aren't more companies that are doing this sort of thing, then we have a real problem.
Absolutely. And I mean, I like that you guys position yourself as not a catch-all solution because as we all know, anyone who's interested in sustainability is that this is such a multifaceted issue. Not one thing contributes to the decline of ecosystems. Like earlier on the podcast, we were saying that the decline of coral reefs, it's death by 1,000 cuts. And, maybe like 400 of those cuts come from sunscreen, but the other like 600 are coming from things like runoff or just overall emissions and the greenhouse gas effect. Like there's so many sources, but if we can mitigate one, that still has a giant impact.
Right.
So definers, please, please, please check out Stream to See for your sunscreen needs. What we put on our bodies is not only impacting us, but it's impacting our ecosystems. Like we've talked about, this common sense approach, like products don't just wash away and disappear. Away is somewhere, and away is oftentimes the habitat of these reefs and these very essential organisms to our ecosystems and to our planet. So how can we scale something like this? Like how can we scale the technology in Stream to See so other mainstream companies can follow suit?
Well, we're actually working on that through Derby University and McCann Worldwide. They are pushing something called RPF. Instead of a SPF, it's reef protection factor. And that can be on any sort of product. So they're working on testing a surf wax right now because it turns out that a lot of the waxes they're using are petroleum based and they're causing problems. So the whole idea would be, instead of being able to say reef-safe, which means nothing, by the way,
Right.
there is no law, no designation, RPF would mean that there was science behind it because it's trademarked and you would have to go to an RPF facility. So the reef protection factor, so far our products have tested as a bronze award, meaning that they do no harm. And then the coral care actually got a gold award because it was so positive. So the goal that we have is to pull everybody else along with us. The problem is you need the consumers to be able, they have to demand it. Otherwise, these manufacturers are not going to care, right? Because we've watched a number of huge brands recently being sued by Sonoma County, California prosecutor that have to take Reef-safe off their websites and off of their tubes now. And they're big, big brands. We'd all recognize the names. I don't want to cast any aspersions here, but we would all recognize them, and it's easy to look up. But they took them off their product, and it hasn't affected their sales one bit. The apathy of the American public is enormous. So they really have to know the difference. If it's not safe for the reef, it may not be safe for you or your kids.
Right. And unfortunately, I feel like that's the angle that we have to take when it comes to gaining consumer interest, is like, hey guys, it's not just about the reefs, which is, in my eyes, reason enough, but it's about you. It's about your health. In fact, it's probably more about that in certain ways because you're applying it directly onto your bodies. So
Exactly. And people don't understand that 70% of the oxygen for the planet comes from the ocean, and the reef is the nursery for the ocean. When the reef dies, what happens, right? Not only are we exposed to storms and all sorts of other things that cause problems, we're exposing ourselves to a lack of oxygen, and that's kind of important.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Mike, for being here. And I'm going to definitely look into RPF, that reef protection factor. So thank you for mentioning that. And we appreciate you being on Sustainability Defined.
Anytime I can help, you just let me know. I'll be here.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
That was a really great episode, Definers. I feel like it really hit home because I use sunscreen every day, and I feel like this is low-hanging fruit that I can really change up in my routine. So just to recap what we talked about on today's episode, please look out for those chemical names on your sunscreen label. These chemicals can permeate through your skin, they can be absorbed into our bodies and affect our waterways and reefs. So some common offenders that we saw on the ingredient list was avobenzone, oxybenzone, homosalate, octocrylene, and octosalate. And of course, there are other ingredients that are in the chemical sunscreen sphere. But if you're confused, rather than trying to look for the ones to avoid, just look for the ones to go for. So the mineral safe, reef safe sunscreens that we want to look for, those physical sunscreens again, are zinc oxide and titanium dioxide. So these are going to be the safe minerals that already naturally exist and are going to be not disrupting for the reefs or our endocrine system. So Also, higher SPF does not always mean higher protection. The difference between coverage of SPF 30 and 50 is like 1 to 2%, but it means a way higher concentration of these chemicals.
And some more tips, definers. If you're using mineral sunscreen, avoid the nano-based mineral sunscreens. Opt for lotion over spray, as we've learned throughout this episode that spray can have some negative consequences on the environment. And remember, sunscreen is not coral reef's main enemy here. Rather, it's a multitude of stressors, but removing the chemicals from sunscreen means removing an immediate stressor to coral reefs, helping them be more resilient to withstand some of those other stressors induced by climate change.
Right. And yeah, like Cecilia said, as Taylor Swift also said, what's happening to coral reefs are death by 1,000 cuts. There's a bunch of reasons, a bunch of stressors, but let's try to really take this one off the plate. And lastly, thank you to Keaton, our sound engineer, for editing this, Katie Day, our expert interviewee, and those participating in our giveaway. Please subscribe to our newsletter, which can be found at www.sustainabilitydefined.com. We're bringing it back. Yay.
She's back.
She's back. She's so back. We have some cool announcements, fun facts, and insights into this month's episode. And also go ahead and follow us on social media at Sustainability Defined. We have some special announcements regarding the giveaways that we mentioned in this episode. So be on the lookout.
Thank you for listening, Definers. We will see you next time on Sustainability Defined.